Story 1. For reference, my family is a close-knit, loving Christian family. However, I feel deeply betrayed by how my younger brother has taken advantage of my parents' kindness. He essentially gets whatever he wants, while I have to work extremely hard for everything. For example, I saved up for 5 years to buy a lawn mower to earn more money, and then purchased my very own virtual reality headset for $300 a year later. However, my parents pressured me into letting my brother use it, and, unsurprisingly, he broke it. I was devastated. I told my parents that he needed to pay for it. Initially, they agreed, but instead of holding him accountable, they simply gave him a lecture and bought me a new headset themselves. To make matters worse, they bought him a better headset for $800, complete with guards and an extra battery, for his birthday. All this while I was always told that anything over $100 had to come out of my own pocket. I painstakingly fixed up a computer that I purchased over the course of a year. Just weeks later, my parents bought my brother a brand new computer for nearly $1,000 on a whim. When I bought a phone, he got a phone with unlimited data and an arcade subscription. I paid for a $1.60 subscription to a popular online game, but my brother got the same subscription for free and never even used it. If I bought a new game, he received the same one for free. When I upgraded my monitor, he received a new one without having to lift a finger. This imbalance might not bother me as much if he contributed more around the house. While my parents help somewhat, most of the household chores that my brother is supposed to do fall on me. Things worsened when my brother got a dog despite my severe allergy to dogs. My parents justified it by saying they gave me an old Ford Ranger, but the truck has been inoperable for over a year. Because of the dog, I needed an allergy test, which caused me to miss 2 weeks of school. As a result, I had to make up a ton of schoolwork, keep up with my Invisalign routine, and manage both indoor and outdoor chores. Yet, my parents still complained that I spend too much time in my room. Meanwhile, my brother, who was failing 3 classes with 0 grades for months, gets to stay in his room playing on his virtual reality headset all day. I have a fragile immune system, so I often get sick. However, the only time I am allowed to stay home from school is if I throw up or experience severe pain. My brother, on the other hand, gets to stay home for something as minor as a runny nose. I had to drop out of a scouting program due to stress and replaced it with more junior reserve officer training corps activities, while my brother was allowed to quit the scouting program without replacing it with anything. He was also permitted to quit Bible study on Wednesdays. When he is asked to do anything outside of his preferences, he throws toddler-like tantrums, stomping around, yelling, crying, and slamming doors. My parents justify this unfair treatment by saying they are preparing me to be tougher for the real world. I have always tried to respect their wishes. I have never talked back or argued, but today feels like the last straw. My parents are insisting that I move my computer from my clean room to the basement, which is filled with allergens and was originally my workspace until my brother got the dog. They claim this is to monitor my screen time. Yet I can hear my brother in his room still using his virtual reality headset. As an introvert, my room is my sanctuary, a place where I can be alone with my books and models. Even my phone is not allowed in my room, but my brother can have his phone in his. I feel completely lost. My parents are not classic, harshly abusive individuals. They are generally reasonable people, except when it comes to my brother. They seem to think my introverted nature is a flaw that needs fixing, rather than something that should be understood and supported. My brother's outgoing, party-loving personality aligns with theirs, and I suspect they wish I were more like him. It feels as though I am seen as a disappointment, someone who needs to be pushed harder to meet their expectations. I rarely get what I want outright, only compromises that leave me feeling unfulfilled. As I mentioned earlier, my computer is being moved to the basement today, while my brother keeps all his things in his room. It feels like I am being pushed to the side once again. I might share more about my struggles with being an introvert elsewhere, but for now, I truly do not know what to do. Story 2. My mom and I, 19 years old and 41 years old, had our usual Saturday workout today, and afterwards, we decided to head to a local store to grab some snacks and groceries. The store we went to was Walmart, the kind of place where you often encounter some rather peculiar behavior. After arriving, we unexpectedly crossed paths with the focal point of our story, an entitled family. The main character was the mother, a woman in her 40s, whom I'll call Karen. She was accompanied by her 3 kids: Jack, a boy around 15 years old, Sabrina, a girl approximately 13 years old, and Tommy, a boy about 6 years old. To top it off, they had a small dog with them, possibly a Papillon or something similar. If you're not familiar, most stores in the United States don't allow dogs inside unless they are certified service animals. At this particular Walmart, employees are not allowed to directly ask if a dog is a service animal. They can only enforce the rule that prohibits dogs from sitting in the main section of the shopping carts where food is placed. This, of course, was the spark for the chaos to follow. While moving from the meat section to the dairy aisle, my mom and I encountered Karen and her family for the first time. Jack and Sabrina stood off to the side, visibly embarrassed, while little Tommy appeared bored and disinterested. Karen, on the other hand, was loudly berating an employee. Her dog was sitting in the main basket of the shopping cart, and the employee was calmly explaining that it wasn't allowed due to hygiene concerns. Karen, however, was adamant, repeatedly claiming that her dog was a service animal. The employee tried to reason with her, but Karen only grew more defensive, her tone becoming sharper with every response. This altercation caused a small scene, with shoppers stopping to watch the commotion. The foot traffic between the meat and dairy aisles slowed to a crawl. Eventually, Karen begrudgingly removed her dog from the basket and placed her purse in the cart's child's seat for the dog to sit on instead. She loudly directed her kids to help her with the adjustment, making sure her irritation was on full display. But of course, the story doesn't end there. By the time my mom and I finished shopping, our cart was completely full, to the point that we needed a second one to carry everything. As we approached the self-checkout area, we heard Karen's voice again. There she was, raising her voice at another employee, accusing them of being disrespectful and demanding to speak to the manager. 3 employees at the self-checkout station called for their manager, a woman in her 30s whom I'll refer to as Amanda. Amanda arrived to find Karen huffing and half yelling, claiming that one of the employees had insulted her, calling her stupid. It didn't take long to realize Karen was referring to the earlier incident in the meat and dairy section. From what I witnessed, the employee had been nothing but professional, simply explaining the store's policy. There were no insults or personal remarks whatsoever. As Karen continued her tirade, my mom told me she planned to speak with the manager herself to clarify what had actually happened and ensure the employee didn't face any unfair consequences. But Karen's antics didn't stop there. While my mom bagged our groceries, I eavesdropped on Karen's conversation to see what else she might say. What I overheard was both shocking and frustrating. Karen claimed that the dog was in the store because a member of her family had autism, and the dog was a therapy animal. However, therapy animals are not permitted in most stores either. Only trained service dogs are allowed. Now, I'm no expert on autism, but I have 2 younger brothers, ages 12 and 13, who are on the autism spectrum, as well as experience with other autistic kids through various events and school meetings. Based on my observations, none of Karen's children displayed any behavior consistent with autism during this ordeal. Jack and Sabrina looked mortified, hiding in their sweatshirts and standing several feet away from their mother. Tommy wandered around, fiddling with his sweatshirt pockets and occasionally walking over to the cart. If any of Karen's children were on the spectrum, it wasn't evident in this high-stress scenario. Most autistic kids I've encountered, including my brothers, would likely have had some sort of visible reaction to the chaos, whether it was seeking comfort from a parent, trying to leave, or even having a meltdown. Additionally, the dog wasn't wearing a leash, harness, or any form of service animal identification. Karen's behavior made it hard to take her claims seriously. Eventually, Karen and her family stormed off into the women's clothing section. True to her word, my mom spoke with the manager to share what we had witnessed, and it seemed that several other shoppers did the same. I don't know what ultimately happened with Karen and her family, but my mom planned to keep an eye on local community pages online to see if anything came of it. As we left the store, a thought struck me. Don't use a disability as an excuse for bad behavior or to justify treating others poorly. Even if Karen's children had been disabled in some way, it didn't give her the right to be so rude and entitled toward the store's staff. In the end, Karen's actions were a reflection of her own character, not her family's circumstances. Story 3. Being the kind of man he was, you might think my father would have hated things like video games. However, someone introduced him to them in the 1990s, just as he began losing all his friends because he was so unpleasant to everyone except my mother. It started in the mid-1990s when he got his hands on a Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, my parents were not struggling financially. Both my father and mother worked, and they had a fully paid-off, inherited house. They were simply frugal about most things, unless it was something they really wanted, except for their nights out drinking. My father was also the type who would always try to take things from me, as some of my earlier stories have shown, particularly with my cars. If he couldn't take something, he would often go out of his way to get the same thing for himself. After I bought my second car and registered it in my name to escape my parents' habit of taking away my vehicles, I purchased an old camper trailer from my boss. With the help of friends, I fixed it up and convinced my uncle to let me park it in his backyard. I spent most of the 1990s living there. When my uncle passed away from lung cancer in 2000, I inherited his house. This particular story about the Nintendo 64 gaming console goes back to 1997. In 1997, I bought a brand new Nintendo 64. I enjoyed and still enjoy that system. My friends had them too, and we spent countless hours playing games like Mario Kart, Mario Party, and Super Smash Bros. Some of us also played Pokémon Red, Blue, and Yellow on the handheld Game Boy system, even though we were no longer kids. I miss those days when kids and adults would gather at the mall to trade and battle Pokémon. As I got older, my responsibilities grew, and my friends and I had less time for such things. When Pokémon Go launched, it briefly brought back that sense of community, with groups gathering to catch Pokémon. But after a few months, most people moved on, and so did I. When my uncle passed away, I met someone who seemed like a great partner, and we got married. During that time, video games became less important in my life. After our eventual divorce, though, I found my way back to them. Despite his age, my father took a keen interest in video games. Unlike most people of his generation, who either didn't care about video games or found them too complicated, like operating a video cassette recorder, he was intrigued. He didn't care much when I played on the original Nintendo Entertainment System. But when I bought a Super Nintendo Entertainment System after moving out, he decided to get one too. His only reason was to copy me and explore the buzz around video games. Before I knew it, he was hooked. He even subscribed to Nintendo Power magazine. Unfortunately, my father had a habit of borrowing my games and refusing to return them. I lost my copies of Earthworm Jim and Boogerman to him, along with a sports game I didn't particularly enjoy. Things escalated when I bought the Nintendo 64. As I mentioned in previous stories, I never set foot in my parents' house again after moving out. However, they occasionally came to my trailer, although my uncle had them trespassed for about a year. Once they started visiting again, it was usually to demand something like me doing chores for them or driving them to and from the bar to avoid paying for a taxi. I always refused. I already handled all of my uncle's yard work in exchange for staying in his backyard. I didn't need them pulling me into more unpaid labor, and I told them so directly. Life continued that way until I bought the Nintendo 64. The arguments over my father keeping some of my Super Nintendo games seemed minor compared to what happened next. After purchasing the Nintendo 64 along with several games including Star Fox, one of my favorites, I became accustomed to using headphones while gaming, as my uncle disliked noise. One day, my father pounded on my trailer door loud enough for me to hear. I don't recall his exact reason for visiting, but my mother had apparently knocked earlier, and I hadn't heard her. When I unlocked the door, my father immediately tried to push his way inside to scold me. I stopped him, but he noticed the Nintendo 64. He demanded to play it, and I refused. This led to an argument, during which he tried to force his way in to take the console. By that time, I was stronger than him and managed to push him out. Furious, he left, only to return later after discovering how expensive the system was. The console alone was costly, and that didn't include accessories like memory cards, rumble packs, extra controllers, and games. My father was livid that I had spent so much money on it. I stood my ground, reminding him that it was my hard-earned money to spend as I pleased. This enraged him further. He eventually bought his own Nintendo 64 with all the same accessories and games I had, spending around $500. Back then, a new game cost between $50 and $70, and the console itself was about $200 to $250, depending on the retailer. My mother was furious about the expense and scolded him like a child. This led to yet another argument, with her insisting the Super Nintendo Entertainment System was no different from the Nintendo 64 in opinion. She couldn't be convinced otherwise. My father later came back to blame me for his purchase, claiming he wouldn't have bought the Nintendo 64 if I hadn't gotten one first. I told him that was his choice, not mine. He stormed off after kicking something, hurting his foot, and blaming me for that too. Over time, he continued to ask to borrow my new games, but I always refused, knowing I'd never see them again. I did let him borrow a poorly made third-party controller, which he broke and then denied ever having. Eventually, my father moved on to the Nintendo GameCube when it was released. However, his interest in gaming faded as he aged, and his hands began to ache from prolonged gameplay. Today, I still enjoy firing up my old systems from time to time. Living alone now, with my children grown and my parents no longer with us, I finally have the time to enjoy them again. Story 4. First of all, I understand leaving something behind in an Uber is frustrating for both the driver and the rider. Uber recently added a $15 fee for drivers returning lost items, which I fully support. In fact, I've tipped a driver $20 before for returning my belongings. Now to my story. Late Friday night, after a party, I accidentally left both my phone and wallet in an Uber. At first, I thought I might have left them at the party, so I waited until Saturday morning to check before contacting the Uber driver. Unfortunately, my phone was off, so Find My iPhone was useless, which was strange because I'd left home with a full charge. After confirming my stuff wasn't at my friend's place, I decided to reach out to the Uber driver. Enter Karen. I tried calling her a few times on Saturday, but either I got her voicemail or she answered and hung up immediately. I figured Uber drivers work weird hours, so I didn't panic yet. Later in the day, I finally got through to her. Karen confirmed she had my phone and wallet, but said she couldn't meet that day. When I asked when we could arrange a handoff, she started pretending she couldn't hear me. "Hello? Hello? I can't hear you," she said before hanging up. Frustrated but trying to stay calm, I called her several more times over the weekend. Same routine voicemail or an immediate hang-up. By Sunday evening, I contacted Uber for help. They reached out to her directly, but on Monday morning, they told me she claimed she didn't have my items. At this point, I was furious. I told Uber that Karen had already admitted she had my phone and wallet on Saturday. But their response? Typical canned platitudes, zero help. Finally, on Monday afternoon, after relentlessly trying to contact Karen, she answered again. This time, her story changed. She flat out denied having my stuff. When I mentioned getting the police involved, she hesitated for a moment, but then doubled down, insisting she could prove she didn't have my belongings. So, I filed a police report. As a last-ditch effort, I took the phone number from her voicemail. Uber uses a proxy number system and texted her, offering $200 for the return of my items, no questions asked. Lo and behold, Karen magically found my phone and wallet. The power of a cash incentive, right? We arranged a meeting, but she kept moving the time around. Coordinating this without a phone was a nightmare, but shout out to my wife, who graciously helped. During the call, Karen seemed very excited about her reward and repeatedly asked how she'd get paid. I waited for an hour in the rain in downtown Chicago, trying to spot her car among the swarm of Ubers. Eventually, I recognized her vehicle, confirmed it was her, and hopped into the passenger seat. Karen handed over my wallet and phone from her center console. As I started counting the $200 on my lap, I said, "Here you go," and placed the cash back in my pocket. I grabbed my things, bolted out of her car, and made my way to a pedestrian-only courtyard. Karen honked furiously, but there wasn't much she could do. Later, I found my phone had been turned off despite having plenty of battery left, meaning Karen deliberately disabled it so I couldn't track it. I understand that Uber drivers have to deal with forgetful customers, and I'm always willing to work with them to make returning items as easy as possible. But refusing to communicate, lying, and effectively holding someone's property hostage is theft. Pulling a fast one on Karen felt amazing. Story 5. This is not one story, but multiple. For a little bit of context, I have a 7-month-old Doberman puppy, and she is a pretty difficult dog, even for her breed. This requires me to be strict and have some very clear rules. She responds well to this, and things are honestly going as well as they could. Anyone who has raised a puppy knows how difficult they can be at this time, and she is definitely no exception. You'd think that people being helpful would be good, but my experience so far has been that people aren't being helpful, but being rather entitled. I can count the amount of people who have actually been friendly about it on one hand, though I have lost count of the ones that are judgmental and condescending. Anyway, here are some of my experiences. Story number 1 was when I just gotten her, and I saw this man with a really big and off-leash dog approaching. So I tried to tell him that our dogs probably shouldn't meet. I didn't know him, his dog, and didn't think it was the appropriate time. I guess I was both super tired and just caught off guard, because I stumbled through my words a lot. He demanded to know why I didn't want them to meet, and when I struggled to explain why, he seemed to get really angry. I managed to explain that I was thinking of training her to be a service animal, but before I could explain anything else, he basically started yelling at me. He went on about how I was abusing her and whatnot. I was honestly super stressed because it was in the middle of nowhere, with no one to ask for help and nowhere to run to. So I don't remember exactly everything he said. I do remember saying that she has dog friends, but I guess unless I let her meet every dog we come across, it is not good enough. He walked off, but then stopped in the distance and started yelling some more. It really seemed like he was going to turn back around and do something worse. So I took my chance and quickly walked back to the train station, and I didn't stop until there were a few people in sight. Luckily, he didn't follow me. My dog was kind of anxious around strangers, both humans and dogs, after that, and it's only now that she's finally back to where we started, mostly just to get her to ignore people and dogs again, because I was forced to let her meet a bunch of strangers until she was no longer scared. I really did my best to be as calm as possible. But this guy was honestly terrifying. He was so busy accusing me of traumatizing my dog that he didn't even care to think he was doing just that. Story 2 is a lot less scary. It's a short one, but I keep thinking about how stupid it is. I was walking my dog, and on walks, I do not let her meet other dogs for various reasons. She does go to the dog park often. I see a stranger with 2 tiny dogs walking in the direction where I'm going. So to make sure my puppy doesn't get too distracted, which would result in me having to correct her, I walked the other way and gave her lots of rewards for successfully keeping her focus on me. This guy yells at me that I don't need to walk the other way. I looked back, but then decided to ignore him, as at this point I knew not to argue with strangers who want to give advice. He yelled at me again, saying that I need to socialize my dog. He didn't sound angry like the other dude, but I still don't understand why you'd yell this at a stranger. You don't know me, my dog, or why I am doing this, so why judge? There could be 1,000 different reasons why I decided to do that, and none are his business. For all he knew, it is to keep his dogs safe. Story 3 happened today and is pretty similar to the last, though with this one I have a history. His really dominant and rather mean GSD approached my puppy once, when he was off leash, and my terrified puppy 9 weeks old at the time was screaming at the top of her lungs, and he refused to call his dog back, saying he wouldn't listen anyway and that my puppy would just have to learn. This dog was just standing over her and invading her personal space, while she was so young and small and absolutely terrified. Although my puppy overreacted in the situation, there is no way she would learn to feel safe that way. This went way too far, and I made sure not to walk in that area again. She is still terrified of GSDs, even though she likes all other dogs. I ran into him again, though this time the dog was leashed. I made my puppy sit and look at me so the man could pass, and surprisingly, she did incredibly well. What wasn't surprising was that the other dog tried to pull his owner towards us, though he luckily did keep walking. Not before yelling at me to give my dog more freedom, though, followed by how I need to socialize her, and that now there was no way she would amount to anything. I was already having a bad day, and this pissed me off. But I ignored him, and my dog actually did really well. Story 4 is a bit different, as it was on social media. I posted a few pictures of my dog on my Instagram, not really bothering with a description or anything. They were just random cute pictures. However, on the internet you are apparently guilty until proven innocent, and I kept getting comments from a few people telling me that my dog is dangerous and basically demanding that I justify myself by assuring them I am training her well. They kept asking me questions and making assumptions, even though there was absolutely no reason to think I am not doing a good job, nor that I didn't do any research. I never replied to these comments until I had a bad day, and I told them it wasn't any of their business. I soon realized this wouldn't help and just blocked them all, after which I took a break from social media. It was just so weird that these random people are assuming the worst about me for no reason. Last story. This isn't about someone giving me advice per se, but definitely an entitled person. I was walking my puppy and 2 women walked by. I greeted them, before one stopped and told her friend to wait because she was going to pet my puppy. She didn't ask me, didn't look at me, and didn't hesitate for even a second. She basically just informed me that this was about to go down, and her tone was absolutely awful. No matter how much you like a dog you see, and no matter how cute you think it is, don't just go and pet a stranger's dog without permission. When she was still very little, dozens of people walked over and just reached over to pet her without even looking at me, completely ignoring the 4 "do not pet" signs she was wearing. I think only like 3 people in total ever asked if it was okay. Anyway, I politely told her that I didn't want her to pet my dog. She asked if my dog was aggressive, and I said no, so she demanded to know why she wasn't allowed. I told her I am training her right now. She informed me that I do need to socialize my dog. I told her that I would happily do that whenever I see fit, which wasn't right now. I guess even though I was polite, I made it clear I wasn't about to argue with her, because her attitude changed and she walked off while her friend laughed. Having a Doberman has really done wonders for my confidence and the way I handle things, especially if you look back at the first story. Long post, I know. Considering how a lot of these stories are about people accusing me of not socializing my dog, let me just assure you that I have done that and will continue to do so. It's just that walks are not the right time for this because of her personality, trust me, Loli, but also because of what I am trying to achieve with my training. She gets to meet dogs and people at moments where it is appropriate and safe to do so, with people who know how to act around my dog. I have a ton of experiences just like this, and it's honestly so frustrating, but I will not make this post any longer than it already is. If anything, I have learned that other people have shitty opinions, everyone is a dog expert, and that I should just ignore people who are quick to judge based on extremely limited information. Most people are just not worth your time, really. Story 6. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is a story about how a company screwed me over, but they reaped what they sowed in the end. So let me first start off by saying that I'm a certified flight instructor. I teach people how to fly. The demand for pilots at all levels, from flight instructors to airline captains, right now is at an all-time high. The reason being, among other factors, is because flying is an expensive hobby, and even more expensive if it's towards a career. Anyway, needless to say, when I first got certified to teach, I got the first job presented to me to understandably start paying off some debilitating debt. This company, which we'll call Company A, is a brand new flight school. So I was really excited to be working at a place where I would be more of a name instead of a number. My intention was to really market the heck out of the school, and when the time for me to move up to the airlines came, to leave the company in a better place than when I had first started. Everything was fine for a little while, with the exception of reality hitting me and realizing how hard it is to advertise the school with no real financial budget for it. I was flying about 10-20 hours of flight time per month. For comparison, at an established school, you can fly 120 plus hours a month, so I wasn't exactly getting paid that much. At one point, the owner of Company A noticed that I was being dropped off at work because I had no car. He said, and I quote, "If you need a car, I have a 2004 GMC Envoy outside. If you'd like, you can drive it for a week, and if you like it, you can pay me as you go." He understood my current financial situation from a prior conversation. So like I said, things were okay for a little while. I was struggling to make ends meet. The thing about being a flight instructor is that typically, such as in my case, you are a 1099 contractor, meaning you're not an employee, so it's up to you as a contractor to pay your own taxes. So as I was struggling to make ends meet, I wasn't able to set money aside for taxes, so I realized it wasn't sustainable. I still wanted to help build the school, but I also needed to make a living. Being a freelance contractor, I went to a different airport on the other side of town and got a part-time job as a flight instructor at Company B. Well, the aviation community is small, and somehow Company A found out I was working at Company B, so they pulled me aside and asked what was going on. I explained to them my struggles of making ends meet, the lack of flying that I was getting, and quite frankly, I was tired of being at the school for 12 hours a day and only fly for 2 hours, while the rest of the time I was basically twiddling my thumbs, hoping potential students come in and giving them free advertisement on social media. Flight instructors only get paid when they're flying or giving ground instruction. Company A wasn't too happy that I was working with the direct competition, even though it's on the other side of town at a completely different airport, and wanted me to quit the part-time job and accept an aviation mechanic job in order to make ends meet. At this point, I reminded them that I'm a pilot and not a mechanic. I didn't spend $40,000 plus to work as a mechanic. Why would I work as a mechanic making $10/hour when I can work as a flight instructor, build flight time, and make $30/hour? I also reminded them that I'm a 1099 contractor. If they want me to fly exclusively for them, that I was willing to sign a no-compete agreement, but they would have to offer me an acceptable salary plus benefits and bring me on as an employee. Something they weren't willing to do, so they reluctantly agreed to keep my services when I told them my intentions of helping the school grow. This went on for a month or two until one morning I found out that I was fired from a student who texted me. My student was wanting to schedule me, but couldn't see my name on the online scheduling system. At this time, I didn't know what was going on, so I sent the administrator a message inquiring why I couldn't log on to the system. No answer. My roommate and I later went on to do some errands in his car. When I came back, I found that the GMC Envoy was missing. I called and texted the owner of Company A, still the legal owner of the car since I hadn't signed a bill of sale, and couldn't get a hold of him. I called his business associate. No answer, and even tried calling the office administrator. No answer. At this point, I was losing my mind, and called the police, who reluctantly accepted and filed a stolen vehicle report. All the while my roommate and I are driving around abandoned neighborhoods from Hurricane Harvey, trying to see if by chance whoever stole the vehicle had ditched it. This went on for about 12 hours. Then I finally get a hold of the business associate, and he tells me quite bluntly, "Your services are no longer required," and then hangs up. At this point, I figure that they must have camped out and waited for me to leave my house so they can take the car back. At this point, I'm honestly left speechless at how unprofessionally they handled the situation. Never mind that they still owed me 3 weeks' worth of paychecks. I would get paid weekly, money that I desperately needed, Never mind that I had personal belongings in the car and that I had made a $500 payment towards the car. Just the principle of the thing. Talk about people from the bottom of the barrel. Then I get a text from the administrator threatening to sue me for lost wages if I take my students away from the school, to which I reply with, "Have fun." Well, needless to say, I called her bluff and all of my students followed me to Company B. I want to say that 3/5 of their clientele left them to follow me to Company B. Months have passed and no lawsuit yet. I found out the reason they fired me was because they had found another flight instructor. An elderly flight instructor that got sick and can no longer fly. At this very moment, from what I hear, is that their planes are just sitting on the ground getting rusty. From one of my students, who still has an active account on their online scheduling system, says that the planes haven't flown in months. So where does karma come in? Company B, who is a well-established school with a large client base and huge following, is moving to the same airport as Company A. They cherry on top, it's right next door to Company A and will have street access, meaning you don't have to drive through a gate in order to get to the school, and will completely block their building from street view. Life is good.